For a little bit of insight and analysis, we're joined by Jami Floyd of WNYC. Jami, this was, relatively speaking, the easy part, getting the nomination from the president, being brought out to the Rose Garden in a supportive audience. Now what happens?
Well, now the real work begins. I mean, we've been to this movie before, Hari, and not too long ago, but never in such a rushed fashion. This is going to be the short film. We've got about 38 days for this president and his allies to try to get this nominee through this process. So it will be a shortened version. Now, this woman has been fully vetted, so I don't anticipate any unforeseen circumstances. I mean, I guess that can always happen. I said that before, so I've learned not to say it with too much certainty. But she was the favorite last time around when Justice Kennedy retired. And then it was rumored then that President Trump decided to hold her in reserve for Justice Ginsburg's retirement, now untimely death. And here she is, fully vetted and ready to go. So I think it will be a speedy process, and I would think confirmation before the president leaves office or is reelected.
Right now, the timeline has the vote basically happening just maybe a week before the election. That's an incredible rate of speed. And of course, anybody that disagrees with this nomination all point back to Merrick Garland and saying there was a 10-month period there.
President Trump is looking at the election, thinking that this would certainly be another feather in his cap for Election Day. But I think that is a bit ambitious. Certainly with her fully vetted record and her, having recently testified in 2017, we have a good sense of what to expect from her time on Capitol Hill, even a shortened time on Capitol Hill, perhaps not even going through the traditional interviews that a nominee goes through, perhaps going directly, passing go and going directly to the testimony phase. But I'm thinking that is a bit more ambitious than is warranted. Still, if we get to looking back at what happened before Hari, politics is the art of the possible. And there's a lot of talk about whether it is within this president's right to make the nomination. Even his detractors, I think, recognize that it is within a president's right to make a nomination, even in a lame duck term. And now the question is whether those like Lindsey Graham, who said, "Hold my words against me if we should ever find this shoe on the other foot," are going to live up to that promise. And it seems that there are enough Republicans, Hari, who are willing to go a different way this time around. And I would point out also, important to point out, that there were 3 Democrats who were willing to cross the aisle and vote for Amy Coney Barrett when she was nominated to the federal bench in 2017. So whether it's going to be November 3rd or sometime in December, I think a fast track is possible for this nominee.
What's also interesting is how much the process has changed. Beforehand, there was always talk and there was always critique of whether or not the presidents in their private conversations were looking at any sort of a litmus test. At this point, the process itself has changed so much where it's kind of out in the open.
Yeah, to be fair, Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself, I would say, was the last of sort of the modern justices who was fairly transparent in her nomination process, rather ironically now, about her views on a woman's right to access to reproductive health and right to choice. And now here we are with her putative replacement, Amy Coney Barrett, who also has been quite outspoken in her writings and her teachings, less so in her jurisprudence because she's really only been on the bench a short time. But you're right, Hari, in the modern world, judges and justices, if you look at Kagan and Sotomayor, certainly at even Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, Trump's 2 appointments thus far, are much more cloak and dagger about their views on not just this issue, this hot button issue of women's choice, or if you want to put it right to life, whichever side of that issue you fall on, but other issues as well, Second Amendment rights, voting rights, all of the issues that are so critically divisive in our political life. Judges tend not to weigh in on those when they are being confirmed. It'll be very interesting to see this judge talk about those issues when reaching for that highest seat in our federal judiciary. I will say, Hari, that she has testified before that she believes that a judge should recuse herself if she cannot be objective, if her personal, religious, or philosophical views lead her to a place where she would have to overturn precedents. And so that's kind of an interesting thing for her to have said in the past. And no other judge that I can remember has said that in a confirmation hearing. That sets her apart in an interesting way, given her religiosity and her jurisprudence, the little bit of it that we know of, and her writing, her considerable writing around women's right to choose, and her very strong views on that subject.
Finally, the chimes from my email that keep going off are likely Democratic members of Congress who are already putting out statements saying, hey, you know what, here's this is the future of the healthcare law as we know it. This is the future of Roe v. Wade as we know it. How close are all of these cases to being considered by the Supreme Court? Right.
Well, so everyone is very focused on Roe versus Wade, which has really been under attack for 40 years. As I see it, and I'm also, my Twitter is alight, as I see it, the court and the courts and those who are advocates against Roe versus Wade are much more incremental in their assessment of that right. It's not about overturning Roe versus Wade in one big decision, in one fell swoop. It's much more about access to health care in a particular state when there is only one clinic 100 miles away. Or do you have to ask your parents before you seek an abortion? Or do you have the right to an abortion or reproductive rights through the Affordable Care Act or through insurance providers? It's incremental access or restriction of access to health care and who those women are. Poor women versus wealthy women. So there is an incremental chipping away at the rights provided for women through Roe versus Wade. I would also quickly say, Hari, I know we're tight on time, but there are so many other issues that the Supreme Court will weigh in on. The Affordable Care Act is already on the docket, voting rights coming down the pike. And Hari, the election itself might be in question. There are absentee balloting issues, voter suppression issues, and there may be a question of whether or not the president wants to leave office if he's challenged in that way on November 3rd or thereafter as we seek to count the ballots up. So we might have a divided court if it's 4-4, or we may have a newly constituted Supreme Court making that decision.
All right, Jami Floyd of WNYC, thanks so much.
Thank you, Hari.